Welcome to Spy School. To work for the Secret Service, you need to be devious, resilient, and utterly single-minded.
If that's you, you're at the right place, because this is the essential guide to espionage.
And it's all been done under my guidance. My name's David Shaler. I used to work for British...
MI5 was set up in 1909 by the eccentric and enigmatic Sir Mansfield Cummings. At his death, his diaries were seized by the government, but recently, Alan Judd has been granted access to them to write Cummings' biography. I met up with him to find out more about the bizarre Sir Mansfield and the beginnings of the British Secret Services. Alan, you wrote The Quest for C, the biography of Sir Mansfield Cumming. Who was Sir Mansfield?
Well, he was a 50-year-old retired naval commander when he was approached to run the Secret Service in 1909. We've no idea why it was coming, because he was semi-retired. He was running Boom Defence down in Southampton. He lived on a houseboat, and this letter was rowed out to him on his houseboat one day. And he didn't want to leave Boom Defence. He much preferred that. But he was asked to come and start the Secret Service and spy on Germany.
What sort of operations did they undertake, and what sort of people were involved?
What he was trying to do was to find people who could go to German dockyards and report on the German naval building program. That was the main thing. Right. And also their armament program in general, and provide early warning of war.
And what sort of lengths would he go to find out information about the enemy?
Well, he'd go to almost sort of any lengths that were legal and practicable. And he went on the continent quite a lot. He used to wear a monocle, he'd take his sword stick, he'd wear disguises. He'd try and get alongside people who had access to information, because that is the main thing in espionage.
So would you say he set up the model which other secret services have followed?
Yes, he was the first C. C stands for Cumming, actually not for Chief. And his successors to this day, the heads of MI6, have all been referred to in official correspondence and still are as C. And they all use green ink, just as Cumming used green ink.
He's regarded as quite an eccentric chap. What are some of his most strange habits?
He had a wooden leg, and not everyone knew he had a wooden leg. And sometimes in meetings in Whitehall, where things weren't going very well, he had his compass dividers, apparently. And occasionally, people didn't know he had a wooden leg. He'd say, "I will not put up with this!" And he'd stick these things in his thigh, you see, and leave it quivering there whilst people looked on in horror in the meetings. And usually he got his way.
It's said that you were in the Secret Services yourself. You can't admit that, obviously.
Obviously, if I had been, I would have to say no. And if I hadn't been, I would say no. So there's almost no point in asking.
Apparently there's a reference in the diary to using certain liquid substances as invisible ink.
Yes, you're thinking of semen, aren't you? Human
Daily.
semen, yes. Well, yes, that does appear. It's not actually in Cummings' diary itself, but it's in the memoir of a contemporary, of someone who worked for him. Cummings said it should be sent off to a scientific research establishment they used to have a lot to do with, and that he suggested the female equivalent should be tested as well.
Inexhaustible supply,
Yeah,
though.
quite, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
I never really intended to become a spy. It was one of those accidents of history, I suppose. I was an undergraduate at Cambridge University, and I was walking back to my rooms, and one of the dons there, who I now know to have been what's called a talent spotter at university, sort of called me into his room and asked me in rather mysterious terms if I wanted to do something a little bit different when I graduated, something in the Foreign Service, without being any more specific than that. So I went down for my first interview down at Carlton Gardens, met Mr. Halliday, who was an MI6 officer, I later learned, and I got invited down for another interview about 2 months later, again by Mr. Halliday. But this time when I went, it was suddenly a completely different Mr. Halliday, the same name but different person. It was a bit mystifying at first, but I realised later, of course, this was an alias. I had to go through the normal civil service exam procedure, which is a long and lengthy set of exams, and to sign the Official Secrets Act, and saying that you weren't allowed to talk about this, going through the exams, or whether you were joining MI6, etc. There was still one final hurdle to go, and that's what's called the positive vetting procedure. And to do that, they check into all your background. They go and interview everyone who's ever known you virtually in your whole life, schoolmasters, teachers at university, all your old friends. They go and interview them all and ask them all sorts of questions about your personality, on your background, whether you ever took drugs or were a member of the CND or any of those sort of things, which would disqualify you from joining MI6. And I got through all of that, and finally, it's a good year after the first interview, I got a letter saying that I'd been accepted and I should report for the first day of training on the 1st of September 1991.
Agent in place. An agent in place is a person who has routine access to secrets and has been recruited by a secret service to obtain intelligence and spy from within their current job. The rulers of ancient India used the most ingenious methods to carry out assassination. Harems of beautiful but quite lethal women. They realized the possibility of exploiting human weakness for sex and employed vishakanyas, or poisoned damsels, to seduce and infect their victims. There were three kinds of vishakanya. Firstly, a baby girl would be spoon-fed poison from birth, very gradually until she herself was immune, but by adulthood had become so venomous that a mere kiss would prove fatal to anyone she came into contact with. Secondly, a beautiful vixen would be requested to seduce an enemy and then feed him with contaminated food and drink. And in the third case, a woman already infected with disease such as syphilis or typhoid would be employed to pass the disease onto the unfortunate victim. One of the most famous cases of a Vishakanya death is that of Alexander the Great. Despite being regarded as one of the greatest generals in history, the healthy and robust warrior died mysteriously, aged only 33. Some say that when Alexander invaded India, the defeated king Chandragupta ordered Vishakanyas to be sent to Babylon. Alexander hosted several banquets there and drank heavily at them. One story claims one poisoned woman attended such a banquet and forced herself upon Alexander, feeding him poisoned wine. Immediately after drinking it, he felt a stabbing pain in his liver. When he tried to throw the wine back up, Alexander was dealt a further lethal blow, a contaminated feather which ensured that the poison would reach his bloodstream. Alexander suffered sweats, exhaustion, high fever and severe abdominal pain until he died in agony. His empire fell with him.
My name is Gavin Mulholland. I've been involved in the martial arts for 34 years. I hold black belts in 4 different combat systems. What we're going to do here is a classic reversal technique, using an opponent's blade against them to neutralise the attack and the attacker. All special operatives from whichever service need to be trained against attacks using guns and knives.
Better world. Sending a person to a better world is a euphemism for murdering an enemy agent. Similarly, send a person on vacation means to injure them.
The training program for MI6 lasted 6 months, and at the end of that we were put through a final exercise to test all that we had learned. Our final exercise took place in Italy, and we were to go there and extract information and quiz a supposed informant in the IRA who supposedly had links with the mafia. That was the scenario for the exercise. Of course, the reality was to see how well we coped when we were inevitably captured by the Italian police and interrogated. So we were taken away by the Italian Carabinieri, believing that we really were terrorists. They treated us like terrorists and handcuffed us, blindfolded us, threatened us with machine guns, etc., etc. And we were taken off to the Carabinieri headquarters, interrogation headquarters, and interrogated. I suppose I'd prepared my cover story very, very well, and so luckily for me the Carabinieri weren't able to find any holes in it. Some of the other people on the course were not so lucky, basically because they hadn't really chosen very appropriate cover stories for their towns that they were in. One had chosen the cover story that he was a chorister and he was travelling around singing, so of course the interrogators asked him to sing a song. And I think as soon as he started singing they realised that he wasn't a chorister. So the lesson I learned there, we all learned, was that you need to prepare your cover story very, very carefully. The more carefully you prepare your cover story, the less problems you have in the future.
Black bag job. A black bag job is a break-in operation to gain access to secret papers which are then covertly photographed. These highly trained teams must conceal any signs that the papers have been compromised. The Watergate burglary is one of the most famous black bag jobs.
The Cambridge spy ring is probably the most notorious spy network in the world. In the 1930s, Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess and Anthony Blunt were Cambridge University students with a shared love of homosexuality, communism and a dream to wreck the entire capitalist system. It's all down to the KGB who exploited these characteristics and recruited them as Soviet agents. I went to meet journalist Philip Knightley, who knew Kim Philby personally. So Philip, you're the only journalist ever to have interviewed Kim Philby. What was he like?
A fascinating man. I'd been writing to him for 25 years, a couple of times a year, saying, how about an interview? And then suddenly in 1988 he said, yes, okay, come on over. So I went over to Moscow, and there he was, the greatest spy in the history of espionage, standing at the door to his Moscow flat in his carpet slippers and his cardi, and we spent the next week together.
So who exactly was Kim Philby?
Well, back in the 30s, there were groups of young left-wing students at Cambridge who felt that the world was going to become a terrible place unless somebody stood up to Nazi Germany. And the only country at that time that showed any sort of spirit for the fight against Nazism was communist Russia. They were recruited one by one into what was called at the time the Comintern, the Communist International, who then passed them on to the KGB, and they became the most effective spy ring in the history of espionage. And Philby was the sort of leader of that group.
How damaging do you think their spying was to the Western agencies?
Well, Philby alone, he wasn't just recruited as a spy for the KGB. The British then recruited him to work for the British Secret Service.
Right.
So you had this amazing situation of a KGB officer being a leading officer, a senior officer in the British Secret Intelligence Service. So everything that Britain did, called espionage war against communism, was betrayed before it even began. And Philby was well on the way to becoming perhaps the head of the British Intelligence Service, a coup unheard of in the history of espionage.
So what sort of information would Philby be handing over to the KGB?
He knew everything that the CIA and SIS and other Western intelligence services were doing in the Soviet Union. He knew what agents they were recruiting, he knew what operations they were mounting.
And how damaging was that?
Well, it negated every single operation that the West mounted against the Soviet Union during that period, from the time that Philby first got in there until he was exposed in 1963 and fled.
What happened to him in the end? What became of Kim Philby?
I interviewed him in January 1988 and he died in May.
Was he happy living over there?
I think he enjoyed his life. He had a beautiful flat. He had a young wife, a young Russian wife. He missed Leon Perrin's sauce, a few little things like that. Yeah.
Other than that, no regrets?
No regrets whatsoever. He died a happy man.
When dealing with a kosh, a club, or any blunt instrument, you can't back away into the line of the weapon. And now we have options. In the East, where a lot of the Special Forces techniques came from ninjutsu and the old ninja and samurai styles, more likely to be using techniques such as strikes to the carotid artery. It sends confusing messages to the pressure sensors in the brain, cause immediate knockout. In the West, far more likely to be using punch techniques into the temple, into the thinnest bit of bone in the skull. Or we're striking elbow techniques under the nose, top lip, driving it in to break the nose, very painful top lip strikes. Bit of a myth that you strike the nose here, you're going to drive cartilage into the brain. There is a possibility, however, if it was true, we'd have no rugby players, no boxers. All these techniques are extremely dangerous. Don't try any of this at home.
Box. Box is the nickname for MI5, which originates from the days when its only address was a post office box in London. Only since the 90s has MI5 had a widely published address, a public hotline for informants and its own website.
16th century England. Christopher Marlowe was a rebel, spy and writer, famous for his unorthodox plays and keeping bad company. On May 30th, 1593, Marlowe spent the day in a Deptford tavern, smoking and playing backgammon with Ingram Fraser, Nicholas Kerris and Robert Poley. Fraser was a known con artist and moneylender. Poley was a spy. Shortly after they'd finished dinner, a quarrel broke out between Marlowe and Fraser over who was to pay the bill. Marlowe, in no mood for argument, went for his dagger. But Fraser had already pulled out his knife and started to slash wildly at Marlowe. He drove the dagger into Marlowe's head, just above his right eye. Death was instantaneous, but was it assassination? Earlier that year, Marlowe had been accused of heresy. In Elizabethan law, this was punishable by execution. Marlowe was due to be charged before the Privy Council, the highest court in the land, but died before the arrest. Privy Councillor William Cecil was the man who knew Marlowe could never appear in court. If he did, he was likely to reveal incriminating evidence that he'd uncovered from his work as a spy. That 4 members of the Queen's Privy Council, William Cecil, his son Robert, Lord Howard and Baron Hunsdon, were all atheists. If arrested, Marlowe could have made this public knowledge. He had to die. The stabbing of Christopher Marlowe was no accident. Cecil had arranged for Fraser, Kerries and Poley to be granted immunity from prosecution if they carried out the murder. Indeed, the 3 men were cleared after a short trial and granted titles and positions of wealth shortly after Marlowe's murder.
Another exercise on our training program was Perfect Neighbour. This was an exercise to hone our skills at doing a reconnaissance on a house in preparation to bug it or put a hidden camera within the house. As an example, if I were to do a house recce on the flat behind me, for example, where this gentleman in blue sweater is reading a newspaper, my job might be to come here every morning, find out when he's sitting on his balcony reading his newspaper, what time he reads his newspaper until, when he leaves, when his house is empty. Then I would need to find out who his neighbours were, who were in the flats on either side, to the left and right, who were in the flats to above and below, because it may be possible to approach one of those neighbours and get them to give permission for us to put a microphone in from their flat into his flat. Also the layout of the inside of his flat, where his bedroom is, where the kitchen is, where the dining room is, where he spends most of his time talking to neighbours. It's because there's no point in putting a bug, for example, in the kitchen if he only ever goes in there once a day to make a cup of tea. You've got to identify which room is the best room to put the bug in. All of those things would be very important, and to prepare a detailed report like that, it might take a whole week of regular visits to the neighbourhood of his flat, fairly discreetly, like I am now, coming in, parking my car in a car park a fair distance away from the block of flats, gradually building up a picture of his movements and habits.
Brain hacking. Brain hacking is the act of obtaining information from a person by force or coercion. It includes various methods of interrogation, from brainwashing to mind-altering drugs.
In this next technique, I've been compromised and I need to remove the threat. I'm going to dislocate one collarbone and break the other one, using technique Shito, using open-handed technique used extensively by Japanese Secret Service against Western soldiers. The reason that this technique is so effective against Western operatives is that most Western punching power comes from the shoulder girdle. By clawing into this clavicle to dislocate it, snapping this one, the bones in this snapped clavicle will rub together, causing extreme pain, completely eliminating movement on the shoulder girdle. All these techniques are extremely dangerous. Don't try any of this at home.
Soviet Union, 1926. Sergei Kirov was a rising star in communist Russia, and Joseph Stalin made him leader of the Leningrad Communist Party. Kirov had been a hardline supporter of Stalin and was thought to be a man that could be depended on. But Kirov's views started to diverge from his leaders, and there was even talk within the party that Stalin should be deposed and Kirov promoted. Stalin, the tyrannical dictator, would not allow this to happen. On the 1st of December 1934, Kirov arrived at his Leningrad office. He was met by 4 plainclothes Secret Service guards, as well as his usual bodyguard, Borisov. The 4 Secret Service guards left Kirov when he reached the 3rd floor of the building. Kirov continued down the hall while the bodyguard, Borisov, stayed a distance behind. Kirov walked down to his office, around a corner to the left. As he walked past the toilets, a man came out and turned to face the wall. The man was Leonid Nikolaev. Standing at the door, about 3 feet away, he shot Kirov in the back of the neck with a Nagant revolver. Kirov fell against a post and slumped to the floor, face down. The assassin, Nikolaev, was revealed to be a disgruntled member of the Communist Party. He'd been given orders by the Secret Service, but told that the murder attempt would be interrupted so that his act would simply look like a protest against the fractured nature of the party. He was never interrupted. Stalin made a grand show at Kirov's funeral, kissing the corpse. He blamed the Bolsheviks for the assassination, but there was never any doubt over who was actually behind it. Cacklebladder. Cacklebladder is Secret Service slang for a live body that has been disguised to look like a corpse. Such a ploy is frequently used for blackmail or to force a confession from an... Oleg Gordievsky was one of the most famous Cold War defectors. Before defecting to Britain in 1985, he was a KGB colonel who'd worked as a double agent for over 12 years. In fact, he was one of our most effective spies of the 20th century. I went to a top-secret location to hear his remarkable story.
Oleg, what was your involvement with the KGB? How come you came to be working for them?
I thought that the life would be nice, full of adventures. In the beginning, it was the case that I had more freedom. The life and the work were very interesting. But through the KGB, I realized the sad, bitter facts of the Soviet reality and the Soviet past.
To become a spy for the British government, you obviously lost a lot of your faith in the KGB. What caused that?
The Soviet regime was a dictatorship, one-party dictatorship. It could not run the country without the artificial means, which meant the police, secret police, the KGB, and the army. And they all together committed terrible atrocities in order to keep the country under control.
So how did you contact MI6?
I contacted the MI6 in Copenhagen in the 70s. I wanted to help a British or American intelligence.
So how did you cope with the day-to-day stress of that, the fear? I mean, if you could been caught, you'd been executed, right?
I avoided arrest for 11 years, but one day in May '85, it was impossible to avoid. I was tricked from London to Moscow. I was interrogated with the help of drugs, so I became drugged for 5-6 hours, talking, and then collapsed, apparently, because I woke up not remembering anything, and I realized they knew everything, nearly everything. They were absolutely sure that I was a British agent, so I was doomed. I knew I was going to die. And then I remembered that I had a secret plan of escape. One evening, at 7 o'clock exactly, I appear at an agreed site with a safe way bag in my right hand. I should stand there for 5 minutes under this lamppost. And sometime later, some British chap, an officer, would pass me chewing Mars bar. And it would be a signal that he had received my signal of, it was called exfiltration. 3 days later, I was supposed to be near the Finnish border. And at that site, I waited for several hours. And only with 20 minutes delay, 2:20, 2 cars stopped. They put me in the boot of one of the cars. We passed all the 5 checkpoints and were in Finland. So I was safe. It was such a lovely feeling.
So you had a little vodka to celebrate?
It's British, they don't drink.
Cobbler. A cobbler is an espionage technician whose expertise is forging false documents, such as passports, visas, birth certificates, diplomas, government documents, and even currency.
Leon Trotsky was a Russian hero who famously led the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution alongside Lenin. But Joseph Stalin saw him as a threat and removed him from Russia in 1929. In exile, Trotsky continued his intense propaganda campaign against the Russian dictator. Knowing his life was in danger, he went to live in a fortified villa in Mexico, where he employed heavily armed policemen to guard the entrance gates and hired a number of personal bodyguards. A Mexican called David Siqueiros was called in to kill Trotsky. He attacked the villa with machine guns and bombs, but Trotsky and his family survived the onslaught. After this attack had failed, Ramon Mercader was contacted. An agent of the Soviet secret police, he took on the pseudonym of Jacques Monard and used his charms to seduce Sylvia Agaloff, an American social worker whose sister had once been Trotsky's secretary. Using this elaborate cover story, Mercader got himself into Trotsky's circle and eventually met the man himself. On August 20th, 1940, Mercader went to Trotsky's house, pretending he had a political paper which he wanted Trotsky to read. But Mercader was also carrying a 13-inch dagger, a pistol and a pickaxe, which he hid under an overcoat draped over his arm. When Trotsky bent over the article, Mercader took the axe from under his coat and savaged a tremendous blow to his head. Trotsky cried out in pain and his 2 bodyguards came running. They knocked the attacker to the floor, beating him unconscious. Trotsky was rushed to hospital where he lived for another 24 hours. Mercader was eventually tried and imprisoned in 1943. Stalin remained dictator until 1953. Cutout. A cutout is a person who acts as an intermediary between 2 members of the intelligence services. Cutouts are used to improve security by preventing contact between agents and to protect them.
During the 1990s, we heard that the Russians had developed a very fast and capable armoured personnel carrier whose performance was far superior to anything in the British Army or indeed in the American Army. And so it fell upon MI6 to try and get hold of an example of this piece of kit in order to study how good it was. We learnt they were in the process of selling a whole batch of these of the detuned export version of these armoured personnel carriers to a country in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates. Now these versions, export versions, were nothing like as capable as the Russian Army's own version. But using an informer who was a very influential arms dealer in Russia, we were able to arrange for one of these special Russian-only versions to be slipped into the export versions to the United Arab Emirates. Of course, we had to pay a lot of money to this informer for them to be done. It was about £100,000, I believe. But of course, it was well worth it. And one of these special Russian-only versions of the BMP-3 was slipped into the export versions. As they were shipped out via Gdansk harbour in Poland, we managed to put the special one on a train, and that was ended up in England. But that was a classic MI6 operation, which basically was a very, very valuable operation for the British Army. It gave them a lot of very useful intelligence, and in the long term saved them a lot of money.
A discard is an agent whom an intelligence service will allow to be exposed in order to protect the identity of a more valuable agent. The idea is that the enemy will assume that it has uncovered all the spies, when in fact the most valuable ones are still at work.
The next move, we're going to be held at gunpoint. I need to quickly reverse the gun, reverse the situation. We're going to use classic Krav Maga Israeli Defense Force technique to do so. And my main style is Goju-Ryu Karate. It's particularly suitable for covert work because techniques are brutal, they're effective, they're not flowery techniques that are developed out of sport. Goju remains a martial art and is not a sport. All these techniques are extremely dangerous. Don't try any of this at home.
Nikolai Koklov was a member of the elite hit squad Smersh. In 1953, he was assigned to murder Georgy Okolovich, leader of a Soviet émigré group in West Germany. But Koklov, a terrorist during World War II, had undergone a remarkable transformation. After marrying a Christian, he turned his back on killing, found religion, and used his latest mission as an opportunity to defect. He surrendered all his weapons to the German police, including the gold cigarette case holding fake cigarettes which fired poison bullets that was to have killed Okolovich. The plan was for his wife and child to join him later in the West. Foolishly, Kokolov began to speak publicly and at length about the activities of the KGB. Stalin wanted the assassin assassinated. On September the 15th, 1957, Kokolov attended a convention in Frankfurt. Having enjoyed a traditional bratwurst dinner, he fell desperately ill. His body swelled, his skin became discoloured, and his hair fell out. Kokolov had been poisoned with thallium, a toxic metal, which had been permeated with atomic radiation and ingested with his food. A medical examination showed his white blood cells were being destroyed, his bones were decaying, his blood turning to plasma, and his saliva glands withering. Miraculously, doctors managed to save his life by giving him massive blood transfusions and a variety of antitoxins. So the former assassin survived, but his wife and young baby were incarcerated into the infamous Russian Gulag camps and never seen again. False flagging. False flagging is when a person is recruited believing they will be working for a particular country or interest, but in fact they've actually been recruited to spy for an entirely different cause.
Spying is essentially intelligence gathering and dissemination. One of the most important skills a spy must have is liaising with other agents in order to pass information over.
But they must be able to make a successful contact while under surveillance.
Using counter-surveillance to detect a tail is known in the trade as dry cleaning. The following exercise is based on former MI5 officer Anthony Blunt's arrangements to meet his KGB handler. In order to ensure security, they dry cleaned each other.
Here we are today in Bloomsbury. We're going to look at a technique called dry cleaning, which is basically avoiding hostile surveillance when you meet an agent. So one of you is going to be an agent runner and one of you is going to be the actual agent. Okay, this is a good place to have a meeting. Julian's going to be the agent runner, Lorna's going to be the agent in this. So you're going to come down here and you're going to make eye contact with Lorna. Right. But what you're not going to do is acknowledge her publicly. And what we need to have is some kind of agreed signal to indicate to her that you've actually seen her.
Right.
And obviously that you're not being followed, that you haven't grown a tail, to use the jargon in this case.
Okay.
So what sort of pre-arranged signal are you going to use?
I'd like a cigarette, do something with a scarf.
Yeah, the scarf's probably good. When you do get up and follow Lorna,
Mobile surveillance, either on foot or even in cars. So when you got up across the road, you can look either way without looking suspicious, because you're like looking for traffic, basically. So what you're going to do now is follow Lorna at a safe distance, making sure that nobody else is following her.
This counter-surveillance technique has been adopted by Israel's Mossad, Germany's BND, Russia's SBR and the American CIA. It is also used by resistance movements and urban guerrilla groups.
Now what we're going to do obviously is to now complete the exercise. We've dry cleaned Lorna so you know that she's not being followed. Now Lorna has to do the same thing for you. And the secret here is obviously not to use the same techniques as you used the first time, because that will look very obvious. You've got to find some more natural techniques that won't arouse suspicion. Well, we have a nice sort of phone box here. That's always provides natural cover. I mean, somebody can walk into a phone box and not arouse suspicion. And then obviously we've got to try and think of a signal that Lorna can give as she passes the phone box.
So what's your signal going to be?
Well, maybe I should, I don't know, do something like put chewing gum in my mouth.
Right, as you pass the phone box?
Yeah, I'll just stop and get some out,
Okay.
put it in my mouth, and that's the signal.
Okay.
I thought that worked very well. I mean, I thought both signals were very subtle. I thought the use of the window, so you didn't actually have to make eye contact again, was very useful as well. That's a technique beloved of the KGB. Obviously, in real circumstances, when you're being followed around by surveillance teams, there'll be many, many people around you. But they have a problem as well, of course, because they don't want to be spotted, because if they're spotted, you won't make the meeting, and therefore they may lose valuable intelligence. And as a result of that, sometimes they have to stand off, or in the terms of the trade, not press surveillance. So they will lose eyeball, i.e. sight of you.
Fluttered. To be fluttered is to be examined by a polygraph lie detector test, which measures the stress levels in your voice to determine the veracity of your answers. Getting fluttered is standard procedure within the CIA.
I was once approached by someone I'd met very, very briefly 7 or 8 years ago, and he came up to me and he said, I've got this Russian camped out in my living room in Brighton, and who's come over to stay in the UK, and he wants to defect. But then it soon emerged that although he contained quite a lot of information in his head, he had even more information which he'd left in 2 sort of schoolboy notebooks in the knitting box of his mother-in-law in her flat in Moscow. And my job became how to recover these notebooks. So I developed quite an elaborate and complicated cover as a businessman to go to Moscow. Went into Moscow for 4 or 5 days. Then used one of the free afternoons I had in my false timetable of business meetings to travel up to this flat and knock on the door of this woman, and then in very broken Russian explain that I was a friend of her son-in-law's and that I'd come to pick up a few of his personal effects. And he'd given a long list written in Russian of the things that he wanted. So I quickly gave this list to the old lady. She went off to get the bits. While she was off searching for these bits and pieces, I dived into the knitting box and got out the notebooks, preparing to take them back. When the old lady came back with a pile of belongings, I realised what was in this list. It was mostly things like his underwear and pairs of socks, which were ridiculous things to be taking back to the UK. So I had to say no to all that. But anyway, I got the book and the 2 books, and then I had to make my way back to the embassy to smuggle them out to Britain.
Illegal. A person is called an illegal if they are pretending to be a citizen of one country but actually come from another country and are using a false identity in order to spy or help other spies. This term was most frequently used by the KGB.
He was working in the anti-drugs division and he knew nothing about drugs, and he was sort of saying to me, well, he asked me, Richard, can you explain to me what the difference between all the drugs are? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I've heard of marijuana and that's the one you smoke, isn't it? He said, yeah, that's right. And then he said, well, and cocaine, what do you do with that? And I said, well, cocaine's a sort of white powder and you sniff that up your nose, or that's one of the ways you can take it. And he said, what happens when you take E then? And I said, well, whenever you go, have you never been into a club? Whenever you go into a club and you see those people with the big wide open eyes and sort of really happy people, that's because they're on E. And he sort of said, oh, you're a member of a club then? Which club are you a member of? And I said, oh, sorry, what do you mean? And he said, oh, I'm a member of the Oxford and Cambridge. Which club are you talking about? And he said, oh, a nightclub. And he said, what, you go to nightclubs? And he was so impressed that I'd been to a nightclub, and it was I could hardly stop myself laughing. And he was working against the drugs, penetrating a drug ring. I don't think he got very far.
Legend. A legend is a faked biography created to conceal the real identity of a spy. They are used when a simple cover story is not enough for a complex operation. Spy agencies maintain stockpiles of identification documents from around the world specifically for creation. Soviet Union, 1957. 25-year-old Bogdan Stashinsky was trained to use the latest KGB invention, a spray gun that fired poison gas. Stashinsky's first target was exile politician Lev Rebet. Rebet was a Ukrainian nationalist, flag burner, dissident, and enemy of the Soviet secret police. Stashinsky tracked Rebet down to Munich, a known rendezvous point for Ukrainian exiles. Concealing the gun inside a folded newspaper, he waited for his moment. In a busy street, he directed the gun towards his victim's face and detonated the firing cap, rupturing an ampoule of acid that vaporized into poisonous gas. The gas killed within 90 seconds and left Rebet looking as if he died from a heart attack. Stashinsky dropped the gun in a nearby canal, walked back to his hotel and awaited orders for his next kill. Stefan Bandera had been a heroic Soviet general in World War II, but was now leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. Another anti-Soviet activist the KGB decided they could do without. In October 1959, Stashinsky received a phone call with the details of his next hit. Bandera also lived in Munich, and he was to be killed with a similar gas gun. Outside his apartment, as Bandera returned from a shopping trip, Stashinsky struck again. This time, the gun sprayed 2 types of gas, but death was not immediate. Bandera died on the way to hospital, and the cause of death was correctly identified as cyanide poisoning. That was enough for the Cold War Terminator. He wanted out of the killing game. He married, and the couple defected to US officials in Berlin in 1961. He served a short prison sentence for his murders, but was released in 1966. He never killed again.
When you're travelling abroad with sensitive material, you're particularly vulnerable to compromise. You have to cross borders, you may be checked by customs, and of course there may be a hostile local police force. You're also at risk at hotels. Whatever you do, don't use a hotel safe to deposit sensitive material. The head of security at bigger hotels often have a relationship with the local police or security service. Hotel staff will know most of the hiding places in any hotel room. But if you have a flat object to hide, don't use under the mattress, don't put it under your clothes in the drawer. Instead, attach it underneath. Gideon's Bibles are found in hotel rooms across the world. They're excellent hiding places, but not the one that you find in the hotel room. What you do is you hollow out a Bible before you arrive, like this one. You then replace it with the one that's already in the hotel room, and your item is quite cleverly concealed in there. No cleaner will ever look at it. If you're going to hide things in a bathroom, don't put them in the toilet cistern. That's the most obvious place that anyone would look. Instead, it's much better to use a panel under a sink or under the bar. Microchips can also be hid in electronic equipment like a travel alarm clock. But whatever you do, don't use toothpaste to hide things. The police and intelligence services always look there.
Lion Tamer. Lion Tamers are the Secret Service hardmen who are called in to cope with sacked agents who have gone berserk, recruits who are being obstinate, or spies who have double-crossed the London, 1961. Stephen Ward was an osteopath with clients from the highest ranks of British society, including MI5 chief Roger Hollis and Anthony Blunt, keeper of the Queen's pictures and Soviet spy. Ward himself was a sympathiser of the communist regime. He was also famed for his orgy parties, held at a country house called Clevedon in Buckinghamshire. It was at one of these parties that he introduced Secretary of State for War John Profumo to call girl Christine Keeler. They embarked on an infamous affair which led to Profumo's very public fall from grace. Ward realised that Keeler was well placed to extract secrets from Profumo, but when the whistle was blown, Profumo was forced to resign. Stephen Ward was put on trial for pimping and found guilty, but he was never to know the verdict. When sentence was passed, Ward was dying of an overdose of barbiturates. His death was recorded as a suicide, but this has been widely questioned. Lord Denning headed the inquiry, but Christine Keeler insists the case of Stephen Ward was not about prostitution, but about espionage and treason. Was it a cover-up? In her book, The Truth at Last, Keeler recalls delivering top-secret documents to the Soviet embassy on Ward's orders. She also claims that Stephen Ward ran a Soviet spy ring which included MI5 chief Sir Roger Hollis. Was it because of his ruthlessness that he had to be stopped? One theory suggests that it was in fact Hollis who ordered the murder of Stephen Ward. Indeed, Ward is reported to have told a friend just before his death, someone had to be sacrificed, and it was me. When the establishment want blood, they get it. Magpie board. A magpie board is a small pack of objects for aiding escape. A typical magpie board will include wire, knives and keys. More sophisticated packs will have radio transmitters, compasses and benzodrine tablets.
I spent 6 months working in Sarajevo. My job there was to debrief an informer in Sarajevo, and I used to have to go into Sarajevo dressed as a Bosnian with an old scruffy jacket and a scruffy hat on, and go and see this informer surreptitiously approach her house, make sure I wasn't being followed, and debrief her, and then make my way back to a safe house, and where I was able to send back the information to London. On one occasion I was walking through Sarajevo. It was dusk, and I was about a kilometre away from the house that I was going to, and there was a shell came in. I kind of realised straight away it wasn't going to actually hit me, because someone had told me, a little kid actually who lived in Sarajevo and was used to being bombed all the time, had told me that, well, if you hear the shell, that means it's going to land far enough away from you that it's not going to hurt you. And so I heard the shell coming in, but it did land quite close, and it was enough to sort of knock me off my feet and stun me for a while. And it killed a girl who was quite close to me. That was happening in Sarajevo every day, so my experience was something that people who lived there had to do every day of their lives. Anyway, had to go off and carry on doing the job as normal. But you know, that's one of the jobs you have to do sometimes in MI6.
Measles. To give someone the measles is to murder them so efficiently that the death appears to be accidental or due to natural causes. The best accident is a fall of 75 feet or more from a roof onto a hard surface. Elevator shafts, stairwells and bridges all serve equally well.
Okay, this technique, as an agent, I want to move the man away from me. I don't want to make it obvious to people around what's going on. Okay, this move, unobtrusive, I'm dropping him into his own space. I'm just pushing my fingers down over the top of his sternum into the soft part of his throat, take him down. Buy me a couple of seconds. All these techniques are extremely dangerous. Don't try any of this at home.
The most important aspect of an intelligence officer's work is the art of writing CX reports, which are essentially a brief and succinct synopsis of the information that an informant is given about a particular topic, that is accurate and precise and does not deviate from the truth. One very famous instance where an intelligence officer wasn't truthful in his reports has gone down in MI6 folklore. The Paris case occurred in the 1980s when a middle-career MI6 officer was sent to Paris to work in the British Embassy in Paris. And there his principal job was to spy against the OECD, the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development. and unfortunately he fell into the temptation of inventing an informer, inventing the CX reports that were supposedly coming from this informer, and inventing also the financial demands of this informer. And rather than paying the money to this informer, who was of course fictitious, he was pocketing the money himself. And this process went on for about 6 months. The particular officer was simply reading the Economist magazine, making up the intelligence reports, sending them back to London, and then he was pocketing all the money. Of course, there was a big inquest into this, and the particular officer was dismissed, and I believe they found him a job in the City of London, and he worked his way up there, and he's now one of the most influential and wealthiest figures in the city, a very well-known figure.
Nightcrawler. A nightcrawler, sometimes called a talent spotter, is an agent who prowls bars and nightclubs looking for government employees or military personnel who can be compromised using booze, drugs or sex.
Nigel West is the European editor of World Intelligence Review. He was voted the expert's expert by The Observer and has written over 20 books on security and intelligence. I went to talk to him about all matters espionage related.
I mean, many of your books contain a lot of information that would have to be described as classified. How do you get access to this classified information?
I try and pick subjects where I know that there is going to be a certain degree of cooperation and access, either from the individuals concerned or from the organisations.
And what do you think are the biggest revelations that you've brought to bear in some of your books?
I think my greatest coup, if I can call it that, in journalistic terms, was to identify Garbo, who was the double agent who operated during the Second World War and really made the D-Day landings possible. So to find him alive in South America when all the textbooks said that he had died just after the war was terrific.
So what do you make of renegade agents like David Shayler and Richard Tomlinson?
Well, I disapprove of David Shayler, and the disclosures that he eventually made did not amount to wrongdoing. All the operations that he disclosed originally were perfectly properly authorized operations, and I've yet to see any examples of misconduct that he has blown the whistle on.
And Tomlinson?
Tomlinson is a different case, and if ever you wanted to find a modern-day equivalent, an authentic James Bond, then he is it. And yet there is bound to be a strong suspicion that he was responsible for putting on the internet the names of his colleagues, which effectively blights their career.
Do you think there is any relation at all between the fictional world of James Bond and the real-life world of an MI6 agent?
Well, there certainly is. Sir Colin McCall once remarked to me when we were discussing this that James Bond was the best possible recruiting sergeant for the Secret Intelligence Service. The agency that he headed, the Secret Intelligence Service, was renowned across the world, and James Bond is the best-known intelligence officer in history.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn fought in World War II, achieving the rank of captain, but he was arrested for the ultimate crime in 1945, writing a letter in which he criticized Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. He spent 8 years in the gulags. Rehabilitated in 1956, he was allowed to settle in central Russia, where he became a mathematics teacher. Encouraged by de-Stalinizing policies of the early 60s, Solzhenitsyn wrote a short novel describing the life of an inmate of a forced labor camp during the Stalin era. The novel was widely acclaimed by the people, and Solzhenitsyn became an instant celebrity. But the Kremlin, under new leader Nikita Khrushchev, disapproved of this dissident behavior. Nevertheless, Solzhenitsyn continued to write, and in 1970 was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. It was decided he must be stopped. In 1971, the author went shopping to a department store in Rostov-on-Don. He left the store unaware that he had been the victim of a KGB assassination attempt. Reports claim the weapon was a poison jelly rubbed onto Solzhenitsyn's skin while he was standing at a counter. The symptoms are consistent with poisoning by ricin. Some hours later, blisters and burns erupted all over his skin. He was bedridden for 3 months, but managed to survive the attempt on his life. Solzhenitsyn believed his first wife cooperated with the KGB to harm him. Indeed, she allowed her own memoirs to be doctored by the secret police to discredit his writings. When Solzhenitsyn published the Gulag Archipelago, he was arrested, charged with treason and exiled from the Soviet Union on the following day. It was not until 1994, after the fall of communism, that he returned home.
One-man Bay of Pigs. The 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, organised by the CIA in an attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro, was a complete disaster. Secret services have now adopted the phrase one-man Bay of Pigs to describe an incompetent agent who has completely bungled an operation.
The technique we're going to look at is a derivative of a Japanese technique called Nikyo. The way we're going to use it is we're going to meet and greet our contact, who we think's been compromised, and we're going to take him down with a handshake. Hey, man. This technique, Nikyo, this is the weakest position the human arm can be in. It's been used by special forces and special operatives throughout the world. From this position, I can take him down with one finger. Okay, all these techniques are extremely dangerous. Some can be fatal. Don't try any of this at home.
The first inkling I had that MI6 had misused their privilege of secrecy was the case of the cleaning women in MI6. When we moved offices in 1995, there were a whole series of spending cuts, and the cleaning ladies were amongst the first casualties. They were all dismissed from their contracts and then re-employed on a new contract at a far lower wage. Now, this was completely illegal, and quite justifiably they were pretty annoyed about this. Much to the consternation and outrage of some senior MI6 officers, the cleaning ladies approached the local Labour MP, Kate Hoey, and with her help they took MI6 to an employment tribunal, much to their resistance, and they used every trick in the book that they could think of to pretend that they were far too secret to be able to go before an employment tribunal. And rather absurdly, they were forced to give evidence in this employment tribunal behind a cardboard screen with only their feet sticking out from underneath the screen. This was at the insistence of MI6. Eventually they won their case at the employment tribunal quite easily because what MI6 had done to them was so illegal. They eventually won their jobs back on the same pay that they were on before. So it was a victory for the cleaning ladies, and they were the first people who ever managed to take MI6 to an employment tribunal. But it was not without a long, hard struggle on their behalf.
Pavement artists. A surveillance agent keeping watch on a house is called a pavement artist. Whilst this phrase is used in intelligence circles, it's thought to have been coined by spy writer John le Carré. Echelon is a global eavesdropping project set up by secret treaty in 1947 between the US, the UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. The system stores millions of records on individuals, intercepting faxes, emails and phone calls. Richard Norton-Taylor is the expert on the subject. He's an award-winning journalist and security affairs editor of The Guardian. Welcome to Spy School, Richard. So what is Echelon?
Echelon is a worldwide network of eavesdropping stations, really, where the Americans and its close allies, mainly Britain, but also Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, have ground stations which receive information from satellites up in the sky. The satellites are eavesdropping on conversations, military movements, conversations between commanders, conversations between you and me, for that matter.
Mobile phones.
Mobile phones, certainly.
Emails.
Faxes. They could get almost everybody if they really wanted to. It's got the computer, electronic capacity. The only thing stopping it, to be honest, is a sort of bureaucratic problem, i.e., whatever the computers pick up, it's got to be transcribed. I.e., someone's got to read it, some spy, spook as it were, has got to read it saying, Mr. So-and-so, or Miss So-and-so has done something. It's got to be actually read on paper. That takes a lot of time. It does have, therefore, a kind of dictionary system, they call it. So the computer will pick up certain words, like, for example, IRA, or terrorists, or other code words they may think that Osama bin Laden uses, for example.
How many keywords does it actually pick up?
It can pick up millions and millions of emails and traffic, as we know, different kinds of communications well, few seconds. And they change the dictionary. For example, if they've got a new enemy, let's say the IRA, for sake of argument, is not a big enemy anymore, but they want to find out what Japanese business is doing, or they want to find out what the French companies are doing, say industrial companies, they will switch the targeting and they will have new code words.
So Echelon's this huge global listening station. Do you think it's right to be fearful of it?
The fact is that this system exists and they're not going to switch it off. And it's going to get more and more potentially intrusive. So people should not be paranoid, but maybe ask questions about it.
And in the meantime, I'm going to switch off my mobile. Thanks very much, Richard.
Playback. Playback is what intelligence agencies call false information that has been sent home by an agent abroad after that agent has been compromised and then forced, often by blackmail, to continue sending back false reports. 1977, Paris. Mossad suspected that the French government was providing Iraq with a nuclear capability. This was a grave threat to the Israeli state, so the Secret Service sent a team of officers to raid the plant in France, masquerading as an organisation called the French Ecological Group. But the French responded by building a new plant, aided by Iya al-Mashad, an Egyptian engineer who was sent over by the Iraqis. Mossad decided that because of his expertise in nuclear power engineering, al-Mashad must either be recruited or killed. In 1980, al-Mashad went to Paris to arrange for a shipment of nuclear fuel to go to Baghdad. He was in his hotel room when a team from Mossad arrived to assassinate him. 3 Mossad agents patrolled the garden of his hotel, while 2 others dressed in room service uniform used the hotel's master key to get into al-Mashad's room. While he was sleeping, the agents cut his throat and stabbed him in the heart. The wound was fatal. When the assassination was complete, the men ransacked his room to make it look like a burglary, hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign on his door, and left in silence. A prostitute later confirmed to French police that she had serviced al-Mashad shortly before his death, and later heard unusual movement coming from his room. Just hours after she'd made her statement, the prostitute was mysteriously killed in a hit-and-run incident. To this day, the Iraqis still do not have a nuclear capability.
The question is asked often of whether MI6 assassinates people. Well, the answer is I don't really know. I think it's possible. Certainly once I saw a plan to assassinate Slobodan Milosevic, who was then president of Serbia, but the fact is that he's still alive obviously shows that the plot wasn't carried out. But the plot was very real. It was shown to me by a junior officer who'd written it. There were 3 sort of classic assassination scenarios, basically. One was to train up some of the Serbian resistance to carry out the assassination, either with a bomb probably, at one of the rallies that Milosevic spoke at. The second plan was to use the British Special Forces to attack Milosevic while using a public engagement and just use a well-placed sniper shot. And the third plan was to kill Milosevic when he came out of the country and to attack his car while it was passing through one of the tunnels in Geneva, using a strobe to disorient the driver of his car and cause him to have a fatal accident. The strobe was a very, very bright flashing light, bright enough to temporarily blind someone. Something else I learnt in MI6, which has quite a lot of relevance still, was that Henri Paul, who was the driver of the Mercedes in which Dodi Al-Fayed and the Princess of Wales were killed. I'm convinced that he was still an informant for MI6 at the time of his death, and I'm also convinced that he's got a very substantial file in MI6, and that file contains almost certainly some very important information about the events leading up to the crash in 1997 which killed the Princess of Wales.
Raven. A raven is a man employed to seduce women and then gather information. John Simmons was one of the most well-known cases. He was a Scotland Yard detective who seduced women in Western embassies in order to obtain secrets for the KGB.
Lovely.
We've come up with some cover stories. We're actually going to be a couple who've come to London just for, say, the weekend, and we're going to check out all the sites.
And we're going to be pretending to filming each other while really we're checking out MI6 buildings, Russian embassies, etc.
We're going to try and get as close as we possibly can without being apprehended.
Come on, sweetie.
The MI6 building is at Vauxhall Cross in South London. It was built in 1993 and cost 240 million. Way over the official budget, but any talk of the cost overrun was considered a breach of the Official Secrets Act. There are said to be 5 more levels of Computer Citadel below. They decide to cross the river to get a closer look.
There doesn't seem to be any security whatsoever. Obviously there's cameras all around the place. 7 or 8 of them we can see quite visibly. We finally found the entrance. There's somebody coming out of the exit, the gate's moving back.
But then a security guard arrives.
Have you finished here then?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. They get rather, if you know what I mean.
They get rather...
Anybody going in and out of the building, they don't like to have them filmed or...
Oh, right. No, we haven't filmed anyone going in or out. We have been spotted, we have been asked to stop filming, very nicely, mind. So we're going to stop now and head off towards MI5.
MI5's headquarters is at Thames House, Millbank, London.
Okay, just over there behind us you can see the MI5 building. MI5 concern themselves with domestic security, basically protecting the realm. MI6, where we were earlier, are concerned themselves with overseas spying and espionage. On the first floor, that's where the computers are stored that have got enough storage space for every single member of the British public to have a 1,000-word file on them. There's 3 cameras, one above each door, but obviously they don't seem to be watched by anyone because we've been out here for 20 minutes and no one's paying any attention to us whatsoever. I'm going to just go and take a closer look.
It is thought over 1 million people have their names on file in the MI5 registry.
Okay, we've come to Carlton Gardens just off the Mall to have a little look at MI6's main recruitment office, where in fact Richard Tomlinson was interviewed for his job in MI6 by a certain Mr. Halliday. As Richard Tomlinson went back to this office over the years, there was still a Mr. Halliday in the same position, but in fact there was a different person there each time he went back.
Number 3 Carlton Gardens was home to one of MI6's most secret departments, Section Y, who were responsible for intercepting Russian military and diplomatic communications. And if you think that the minibus parked outside looks familiar, you'd be right. It's the same minibus we saw earlier leaving the MI6 building.
There's a succession of doddery-looking gentlemen in there in school blazers and ties, so obviously it must be something to do with the Secret Services. Either that or cricket. Behind us is the Metropole building in Northumberland Avenue, WC2.
The people that work in that building provide key intelligence to the Ministry of Defence and to the Armed Forces, and they make up a large component of the UK's central intelligence machinery.
We're nearing the entrance. There's nobody outside as far as I can see in like a security type role. Still looking like tourists. You can get some nice shots all around.
Oh yeah.
And straight into the building. Thank you very much. The more guppy I look, the less people pay me attention.
But then, security arrives.
And there's the security guard coming out.
Oh no. What's that over there?
Is that Trafalgar Square?
Kensington was one of the key centres of spying in Cold War London.
The salmon pink building behind us is number 3 Rosary Gardens, and it used to be owned by Soviet intelligence. It's now owned by the Russian Federation.
We're going to go and check it out now and we try and get a closer look at it.
It is thought number 3 Rosary Gardens is still in use by Russian intelligence today, so they must be discreet.
Are we just going to walk straight past?
I'm going to pretty much loiter by it,
Yep.
give you a chance to get it, and then I'm going to point at Brecon Place and we're going to head down there. Oh, I think we should go that way.
You think that way?
Did you get any shots there? Any nice shots? I think we've got to go that way.
I mean, I felt that they were watching us, did you?
Oh, definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, we're totally outside their window, right outside their front window with a handheld camera, videoing, pointing towards it. Yeah, I think they were aware we were there.
Safe assumption.
But I think we managed to pull it off by fumbling with A to Zs and pointing and wearing very stupid clothes. Now we've come to Kensington Gardens, Kensington Church Street, to do the last place on our list, the Russian Embassy.
Located at number 18 Kensington Palace Gardens is the old Soviet embassy.
Isn't that fantastic? Doesn't have any name or anything on the gate. Totally anonymous.
At the height of the Cold War, 60% of embassy staff would have been KGB officers. The building is now the most expensive private house in Britain, valued at 85 million. The Russians have now moved across the road to number 13. Recently, traitor Rafael Bravo was arrested after he phoned the embassy saying he had documents he wanted to sell. This suggests MI5 monitor all communications in and out of the building.
We found the embassies that we were looking for. We got the footage of it, I got some close-ups, and we done all that we set out to do, so...
Now, after the spy tour of London, my guide to the hotels, bars and restaurants historically used by Britain's spooks. We also investigate the MI5 laptop, which mysteriously went missing after a group of British intelligence officers got drunk in a tapas bar near Waterloo.
Over the years, many of London's top hotels have become notorious spy haunts, like this one here, the Jolly Hotel St Ermines. It's situated just opposite New Scotland Yard, and Westminster, with all its government offices, is just down the road. During the Second World War, MI6 used the top 2 floors of the hotel for its offices. The Special Operations Executive was also based here, where it's rumoured that they stored explosives. Throughout this period, their presence here was a closely guarded secret, to the extent that the buttons on the hotel lift only went to the 4th floor. This door used to lead to a secret passageway directly connecting the Houses of Parliament and the hotel. This is arguably London's most discreet rendezvous. Here we are in Cloisters Brasserie, the hotel restaurant. MI6 uses this place to interview potential new recruits. In fact, Kim Philby, one of the treacherous Cambridge Ring of Five, was interviewed twice here. Or you could proceed to the Caxton Bar. It's still used today by intelligence officers to meet agents. As you can see, it's ideal. The red satin wall coverings muffle sound, and the dark corners provide discreet places to debrief agents. Another infamous meeting place for spies is here, Brown's Hotel in Piccadilly. This is a drawing room which has been used for many meetings of famous spies. As you can see, it's quiet, comfortable, and above all, discreet. During the Cold War, one such meeting which took place at this hotel concerned Peter Wright, who wrote Spycatcher, Alistair Watson, and Anthony Blunt, who was subsequently exposed as a KGB spy. During the 24-hour debrief, the men drank several bottles of gin, and it ended up in a fight. Obviously, drinking large amounts of alcohol on the job is not recommended. Otherwise, you might end up losing your security laptop or briefcase.
That's exactly what happened to one MI5 intelligence officer after a drunken night at this tapas bar, not far from the main MI5 building at Thames House.
So we're trying to build up a clear picture of what happened to the MI5 laptop.
It's very difficult to say because how do you recognise an MI6 or an MI5 agent? First thing I heard of it was on the Tuesday morning. We just had a load of reporters at the front door. They wanted to know, what if we knew anything else or what was going on and what had happened. And I said, well, we don't know what's happened.
The morning after the laptop was lost, 2 undercover MI5 officers went to a local minicab firm to try and track it down.
2 of them came in and approached me and say that a colleague of them was having a drink and they believed due to the worse for a drink they must have left their case in a car by accident. We got our books out and record and computer and went back on every job we did that day, and none of our car matched up to that. Apparently what happened, it was the owner or the landlord of the bar who phoned the cab, wasn't them, so that's why they had no clue which cab they phoned.
After the female MI5 trainee got blind drunk, her employers put an ad in a London paper in a bid to get the laptop back. The ad purported to be from an academic who had lost vital research notes.
I wouldn't say that people here have been nobbled, but certainly there's very much a reticence to speak about the whole case. Definitely. And to be fair, who can blame them?
Scalp hunters. Scalp hunters are specialists in defection. They are the men called upon when someone like Oleg Gordievsky says he wants to flee from Russia. The scalp hunter is required to find out whether the defector is genuine or...
Georgy Markov was an acclaimed Bulgarian writer, but in the 1960s he angered his government by writing a play about a plot to murder an important general. An arch-enemy of the communist state, Markov fled the country and defected to England in 1969, where he was granted political asylum. In London, he continued to anger his former country by working for the BBC World Service, broadcasting anti-communist propaganda, including the sex habits of Bulgarian leaders. At about 6:30 p.m. on September the 7th, 1978, Markov was walking over Waterloo Bridge on the way from his car to his BBC job at Bush House. Markov was walking past a bus stop when he felt a sharp thrust against his right thigh. Grasping his leg, he turned to see a stranger holding a closed umbrella. The stranger apologised in a thick foreign accent, then jumped into a cab. Markov felt no ill effects for several hours, then suddenly broke out into a sweat. He went home to bed, vomiting and fevered. His leg had stiffened so badly, a friend rushed him to hospital, though surgeons did not detect the toxic substance in time. 4 days later, the Bulgarian dissident died. Microbiological experts later found in his leg a minuscule platinum iridium pellet smaller than the head of a pin. The deadly poison that had been planted on the tip of the umbrella was eventually identified as ricin, a deadly toxin favoured by the KGB.
I know the agent I'm meeting has been turned. I need to neutralise him fast before he can blow my cover. Hey, got a cigarette? I need to initiate movement from him using a cigarette packet. I need to take him out. We need to take him out fast. Throughout the 60s, several agents were found with crushed trachea. This is the sort of technique that might have been used to do it. Obviously, it takes a lot of training to get this right. Under no circumstances should this be attempted.
The book in MI6 is not really dangerous at all. In fact, no MI6 officer has ever been killed since the Second World War. That's partly because of very good training and very good preparation for jobs, but mostly because any work that's dangerous, physically dangerous, is not undertaken by MI6, but is undertaken by a group of very highly trained people called the Increment. These people all come from the British Special Forces, from the SAS and the SBS, and a few from the RAF too. The people who are selected to join the Increment from the armed services are all people with really quite extraordinary skills. For example, some of the Increment people from the SBS, they were qualified as trawler skippers before they joined the SBS, so that they could pass themselves off in other professions. Often also they were chosen because they didn't look like soldiers. They were either very, very small or very overweight, or simply just didn't look like soldiers, but so that they could pass themselves off in an airport without looking like a soldier. When they join the Increment, they're then given further training by MI6, given training in disguise, in using false passports, in using false credit cards, that sort of thing. And it's them that undertake all the physically dangerous work for MI6.
Shoe. When a spy is carrying his shoe around with him, he is in fact carrying a false passport or visa. An agent working abroad often needs a shoe. Richard Tomlinson carried a false New Zealand passport, which he was made to post back when sacked by MI6.
The best way to find out about the Secret Service is to speak to people who've actually worked for it. Tommy was recruited by British intelligence due to his contacts within the Republican cause. While he was working for the Force Research Unit, he spent several years working undercover in Ireland. For his own security, he's in disguise and going under another name. I met up with him to find out what he had to do in the name of the British government.
Tommy, thanks for coming on to Spy School. Now, I understand that you were recruited by Army Intelligence in 1990. Why do you think they saw you as a valuable agent?
At the beginning, it's to do with a relationship that I was in and family members connected to that person. But nothing really developed until I moved to Northern Ireland, where I was introduced to certain individuals that are particularly wanted in Northern Ireland for terrorist offences.
I presume you had friends in the IRA. Did you ever feel like you were betraying them?
No. Why would you feel like you're portraying somebody who's murdered people, who's plotted to kill people, and that's not friendship.
What exactly was your job role once you were recruited?
What I will say is that all the information that the Army asked me to ascertain, some of it, a lot of it, was ascertained in the Irish Republic, and it wasn't ascertained by legal means. A lot of it was to do with official sources of information from persons who work for state organisations. Unfortunately, that required making a payment to those individuals to part with that information.
So you're saying you had to bribe Irish officials for the British government?
Well, unfortunately, it seems to be a tool the British government seem to be using when it comes to official sources in the Irish Republic.
So you were trespassing on government property? Were you breaking and entering?
I unlawfully gained access to a number of installations scattered along the Northern Irish border on the Irish Republic side. From what I've been told by the Ministry of Defence, there is no legal authority of the British security forces asking people such as myself to operate inside the Irish Republic. In other words, everything that we've done, and people like me done inside the Irish Republic, was in all probability illegal.
When Roberto Calvi became Director General of the Banco Ambrosiano in 1971, he transformed the financial house into a major international player. However, it was not done by lawful means. A financial investigation found that the bank had illegally exported several billion lira. Calvi was arrested and convicted. On the brink of financial collapse, Banco Ambrosiano was salvaged temporarily with letters of patronage from the Vatican Bank, which itself had been involved in several shady deals. On his release, Roberto Calvi fled from Italy with a briefcase full of documents, intent on making another illegal fortune. But 1 week later, his body was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. Several bricks were stuffed into his pockets. When the river police cut his bloated body down, they found in his possession a designer watch and £10,000 in cash. This suggested he was not a victim of any ordinary crime. A suicide verdict was overturned, as this would have required impossible acrobatics from a 62-year-old man who was overweight and suffered from vertigo. Since he couldn't have been forced alive onto the scaffolding without leaving signs of a fight, detectives believed he must have been strangled elsewhere, then brought to the bridge, where he was then strung up. The killers then escaped by boat. But who did it? It's thought the KGB ordered the death of Calvi to stop the Vatican's clandestine funding of anti-communist causes. Calvi was indeed involved with Licio Gelli, a KGB agent and head of a renegade secret lodge called P2. Members of P2 reputedly wore black robes and addressed each other as Friar. Is it just coincidence that Calvi's body had been found hanging from Blackfriars Bridge?
We have been compromised and captured and are being held at bayonet point. Our chance of escape get less and less and less as you get moved down the line. We need to take out the first guy, we need to take him out fast. First step is to clear the weapon out of the way. Next, I'll grab the weapon behind his leading arm, drive in for the arm break. Then drive the butt of the weapon between his legs, spin round for a takedown. As he goes down, reverse the weapon, bayonet to the throat. All these techniques are extremely dangerous. Don't try any of this at home.
Snow job. When a secret service produces vast amounts of confusing reports and offloads them onto the enemy through double agents, it is called a snow job. The aim is to get them to waste vast numbers of man-hours by sifting through useless paperwork.
They thought that they could fire me, and they thought that getting me a job in the city would absolve them of any responsibility to follow basic employment law. And they kept on saying to me, well, what's the point in taking us to employment trial? We'll get you a job in the city. And they must have said that to me a dozen times, and I must have said to them a dozen times, that doesn't absolve you of the right to give me an employment tribunal, and I don't want a job in the city, thank you very much. What was even worse than that was that MI6, when they realised that I wasn't going to go quietly and that I was going to put up a fight, they set out to blacken my name, ruin my reputation, basically with their friendly contacts that they had in the press.
Governors telling them that I was all sorts of pleasant things about me, trying to justify to ministers and to the press and to the public why they'd sacked me. They just thought they could get away with it, and I wanted to know why I'd been fired. I still do. Still haven't been told.
Swallow. A swallow is a woman, often a prostitute, recruited to seduce and compromise men who have access to valuable information. They are thoroughly trained for the job so that they have no shame when they are called on to work for their country.
Information is power. In this day and age, it's much easier to hack someone's hard drive than it is to launch a physical surveillance operation against them. Every time you go online, your computer can be infiltrated either overtly or covertly. A lot of people don't know that the world's most popular operating system has a backdoor built in. Any knowledgeable person can access information on your hard drive and take it away without you ever knowing. We therefore need to look at encryption systems which can prevent this from happening. PGP is a public key encryption system used to protect emails and data files. It can also protect your entire hard drive. Its inventor, Phil Zimmermann, says that it would take all the computers in the world 1 million years to crack PGP. Since he developed the system, he has been harassed by security and intelligence services. Any commercial key has been produced in conjunction with the government. It is therefore not secure because the security and intelligence services have access to a backdoor key. Version 5 of PGP is no longer readily available, but if you can get access to it, use it because there's no backdoor key. If you want to get the latest version of PGP, go to its website at pgpi.com. The most obvious way to draw attention to yourself is to use encryption. The security and intelligence services are always looking out for this. Ironically, the people responsible for September the 11th in the US did not use encryption, and this is how they escaped detection. Instead, they used JPEGs and other files like this to hide messages.
Rome, May 13th, 1981. Pope John Paul II was being driven through the Great Piazza in front of St. Peter's Basilica. But running through the crowd was 23-year-old Mehmet Ali Agha, an escaped murderer from Turkey. He raised a pistol above his head, fired 2 bullets which hit the Pope in the abdomen, the right arm and left hand, badly wounding him. In hospital, the Pope underwent surgery to remove the bullets from his body, but he never made a complete recovery. Captured at the scene by Italian police, Acca freely admitted firing the shots in an attempt to assassinate the Pope, but his motives were always to remain unclear. In July 1981, Acca was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison. At his trial, Acca claimed that KGB had enlisted the Bulgarian Secret Service to kill the Pope because of his support for the Solidarity movement in Poland. The KGB were keen to eliminate any threat to communist rule in Eastern Europe. Indeed, 3 Turkish men and 3 Bulgarians were charged with conspiring with Acca, but acquitted due to lack of evidence. It is likely, however, he was telling the truth. Before the assassination attempt, Acca spent 2 months living in Sofia, Bulgaria, in a luxury hotel where foreigners were closely watched by Bulgarian agents. Bulgarian intelligence at the time must at least have known what Acca was planning to do, and either did not hinder him or actively helped him. But shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Bulgarian secret police destroyed its records, and the truth will never be known.
In my particular case, MI6 dismissed me without any reason, without any warning. In employment law, you're obliged to give people a warning before you dismiss them, both written and verbal. I received none of that, absolutely none at all. And they admitted that quite openly to me. But what was worse than that was they then denied me access to an employment tribunal under this absurd excuse, oh, we're far too secret to go to an employment tribunal, you can't take us to an employment tribunal. And they basically abused the privilege that they have of the Official Secrets Act to stop me doing that. In fact, there was nothing that would have come out in an employment tribunal that would have breached any secrecy rules because it was simply a personnel dispute. It wasn't anything more complicated than that. If they get away with using secrecy to cover up cock-ups, cover up their dishonesty, cover up their misdeeds, then the whole essence of government fails. And so the lesson I think that everyone needs to learn from this, and particularly government ministers, is that they must scrutinise very, very carefully whatever MI6 say to them, because it needn't necessarily be the truth.
The Emily. The Emily is the name used for an American citizen recruited by the KGB. The first Emily was an Assistant Secretary of State in the 1950s. She was recruited by a KGB agent posing as an insurance salesman and leaked state secrets for 14 years.
The mid-80s, Stockholm, Sweden. Olof Palme was Prime Minister, a popular and charismatic leader who had dedicated himself to themes of socialism, peace and solidarity. He was not bound by a Cold War mentality and had taken a strong stand against the Vietnam War and the oppression of the Third World. Palme was also an ardent opponent of the apartheid regime in South Africa. He'd recently spoken very passionately against racism at the African National Congress. On February 28, 1986, Palme went to see a movie at the Grand Theatre in Stockholm with his wife Lisbeth. As they left the cinema, a man in an overcoat approached from behind. He drew out a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver and shot the Premier in the back of the head. Police have never been able to solve the crime, though several leads were followed up and let go. Abdullah Öcalan, a member of a Kurdish rebel group, was investigated, and unemployed labourer Carl Pettersson was imprisoned but released on appeal. Then, MI6 received a report claiming Olaf Palme had been murdered on the orders of the South African Security Service. The report implicated South African spy Craig Williamson. Williamson was also linked with the murder of a former hit squad commander, Eugene de Kock. He said Williamson was part of a top-secret operation called Longreach, which planned to eliminate the opponents of apartheid. Palme had been killed by the agents of racism abroad, and it is now also thought that the killing was abetted by a racist Swedish policeman. The apartheid regime was dismantled just 7 years later.
A stabbing attack with a long weapon could be a stick, it could be an umbrella, it could be a rifle with a bayonet on. The defence is much the same. It involves a body defence, a deflection, and a ferocious counter-attack. This is as taught to the Israeli Defence Forces.
Walk-in. A walk-in is someone who voluntarily offers to spy. They literally walk into an embassy or intelligence agency without any prior contact. The term was especially applied to Americans who walked into Soviet embassies and offered secrets for sale.
After I got out of prison, I was chased around by MI6 through a whole series of countries. I spent time in France, where I was arrested. I went to New Zealand, where I got arrested again. I went to Switzerland, where I got thrown out under pressure from MI6. I went to Germany for a while, and I finally ended up in Italy, where I lived for about a year. And I'd been there for about 6 or 7 months when I first realised that I was under surveillance. And they were following me all around Milan. And eventually I came to a roundabout, and it was one of these big sort of roundabouts. There was hardly any traffic. So the car was right behind me, it was a little Fiat, and so I got in my car and I just started driving around the roundabout faster and faster and faster. And the little Fiat was behind me trying to keep up. I'd go around again, a bit faster this time, and he was going around the corner. His tyres were squealing away trying to keep up with me. And all the time as I was going around the roundabout, I'd be indicating to turn off, fooling them so that they kept on following me. And eventually I just kept on going faster and faster and faster until I got right behind them, caught them right up round the roundabout. And they didn't know what to do because suddenly they were supposed to be following me and I was right behind them. And I could see them on the mobile phones ringing up their controller, whoever it was, to get advice.
Annie Machon is an ex-intelligence officer. She worked with David Shayler at MI5 and they're now partners. After David alleged that British intelligence had funded a plot to assassinate Colonel Gaddafi, they fled to France together. I met up with her to discuss what life was like on the run with David. Annie, thanks for coming on Spy School. Your decision to flee the country and also kind of turn your back or turn against the institution that you'd both been working for must have been a very difficult one to make. What clinched it for you? What made you decide to go?
I don't think there was any one sort of dramatic moment when we decided we were going to do it. I mean, it was more an accumulation of disillusionment with the service when we were there. So the best thing was to get Dave out of the country where he could try and then give his most serious allegations directly to government so that they would listen to him.
So you started off in Holland?
Well, we were travelling around for quite a long time, about a month of just travelling around without destination, just changing hotel after, going from hotel to hotel. Getting pretty paranoid as well about the fact we knew they'd be after us, trying to stay one step ahead.
What was the stickiest situation you found yourselves in?
A journalist approached us via our lawyer, John Wadham. He sort of introduced himself and then immediately said, I'm not going to beat about the bush. I'm here as a representative of the Libyan intelligence services. Oh, and by the way, I'm armed. And he patted under his, his arm, yeah. Dave and I sort of froze at that point, thinking, oh my God, what have we got ourselves into here? And he basically said that he was there to make an offer. He was prepared to offer David millions of pounds in return for information about the Lockerbie suspects who were still wanted by the UK at that point, and also details about the Gaddafi plot and agents in Libya. So of course, you give that sort of information, people are going to die. That is betraying your country. So of course Dave said no, and it was really a case of how quickly could we get out of that meeting. So at this point we were on the phones to our lawyers, and they rang up MI5, they rang up the French equivalent, which is the DST, and both organisations said it was the problem for the other one, and they weren't going to do anything about it.
So what exactly happened when David got arrested?
They arrested him in the hotel foyer and were going to cart him off without telling anyone about it. But luckily Dave's actually quite quick thinking, he's very quick on his feet. So when they said, "Do you have any ID, Mr. Shaler?" and all that sort of thing, he said, "Well, I've got the passport out of my hotel room," knowing that I was there, but also knowing the passport wasn't there. So at least I knew that something had happened to him, otherwise he would have just vanished.
So what time did you decide to go back to Britain?
We really felt we had taken it as far as we could with David Broad,
Yeah.
and it was time to come back. And I suppose there's a sense of coming back and facing the music. It used to be one of the charges that was levelled against him by the right-wing press. You know, if he believes this so much, he should do this. So he has, and he thinks it's important enough to risk going to prison for.
Another common way of controlling people and manoeuvring people is with a headlock from the side. Very difficult to come out of unless you know how. The Mossad are teaching this to children in the school playgrounds.
The late 1980s. Robert Maxwell was one of the world's most prominent and wealthy media moguls. But investigators had recently discovered he was propping up his empire with stolen pension fund money. It was a major financial fiasco. Maxwell desperately needed money, so he called ORA, the Israeli arms holding company with strong links to Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, and borrowed cash. These creditors were furious when they went unpaid, so Maxwell flew to Tel Aviv to resolve the problems he had with them. But his outbursts and threatening behaviour made the Israelis realise they should break all ties. One evening in 1991, then director of Mossad Nahum Admoni went to dinner in Maxwell's hotel room. It's not known what was said, but Maxwell flew back to London just hours later. By this time, Maxwell was being investigated by the British Parliament. Mossad realised he was a loose cannon. Was it at this point they hatched a plot to get rid of him? They told him to fly to Gibraltar, board his yacht and set sail for the Canary Islands, where he was to wait for a message from them. Maxwell was allegedly assassinated by Mossad on November the 5th while sailing on his yacht off the coast of Tenerife. A two-man hit team crossed the sea in a dinghy and boarded the Lady Ghislaine. They found Maxwell on deck where he was overpowered. One held him down while the other injected a bubble of air into his neck via his jugular vein. It took just a few moments for Maxwell to die, then his body was dumped overboard. It was 16 hours before the corpse was recovered. Enough time for fish to attack the flesh and for a needle prick to recede beyond detection. Without the exact cause of death clarified, Maxwell's body was flown to Jerusalem for burial. Wet work. When spies go off to do wet work, they won't be climbing into their Lotus Esprit and driving underwater James Bond style. Wet work is any intelligence operation involving murder or assassination.
Hi.
I'm Lorna.
Hi. Nice meeting you. Hi, Julian. Hi. I'm Uri Geller. And today, what I'll try to do is train you to do remote viewing, psychic spying.
Before we start, I've done a little drawing of an object just back there, and I wondered if I could put you to the test and see if you can read my mind and see what it is I've
Okay, you have it on you?
Yeah, I've got it on me.
All right. And you haven't told anyone what you drew?
No one knows.
So you're the only one who knows?
I wanted to test you.
Okay, now, Julian, stare into my face, and this is what I do. Let me just grab a napkin. I want you to look into my face and visualize the drawing. Just give me time. You know, this is real, and I am getting something. Just stare at me. Don't take your eyes off me. And I'll try to also tilt it towards the camera. Yeah. Yeah. All right, look, I'm more or less getting something like this. Well, here it is. I honestly do not know what it is. Pull your drawing out now. You have not seen what I drew? Now I'm all excited. Bingo!
Whoa.
Look.
No way.
Exactly.
It's a very bad tennis racket.
I'm excited myself because that is very unusual. And I did not know what it was. I thought it was a wine bottle.
Right.
You know those Italian bottles that have a net around them. But that's telepathy, and what this is all about. I'm glad you did this, because it's called extrasensory perception, telepathy. And people who are sensitives and can transmit a thought, they are the right people to train for remote viewing. And that's what we're going to do today.
What's been your background with remote viewing then? Where have you used it?
I was approached by the American Defense Department through certain scientists, and they wanted to see if my powers could actually translate into being able to send my mind thousands of miles away, bring back information. So some of the tasks that was given were quite interesting. They stationed me in Mexico, and my task was to look at the Russian embassy in Mexico City. I was told on which floors the computers were, and I would scan the computers outside the embassy, write down things that I was getting. Then the most bizarre task was 2 Russian KGB agents would fly with secret information on floppy disks inside diplomatic pouches attached to the wrists. And my task was to sit and throughout the flights, I would bombard the floppy disks and erase them. So when they landed in Russia, the floppy disks were empty.
Uri Geller claims that the CIA asked him to try and stop the heart of a pig, because if you could do that, you could use the same remote technique to stop the heart of Soviet President Yuri Andropov. Geller is training Julian and Lorna in psychic spying.
What we will do, we will go through an exercise that will awaken those dormant powers that we all have. So I want you to close your eyes, both of you. I want you to visualize a TV screen in your mind, an imaginary TV screen. See it in front of you. I want you now to visualize a light, a white light in the middle of this imaginary screen. I want you to grab that white light and shoot it out into time and space. Do it right now. Travel with that white light and let it go, let it go. And now, suck it back into your minds, quickly. Bring it back into that imaginary TV screen. Relax, and now open your eyes, both of you. Okay, I prepared you now for the journey, the remote viewing journey. Are you ready for this? Okay. Now, I've prepared some pictures inside the laptop, and I will open it, you will see it. He will not see it, he cannot see it, he doesn't know what it is. What I want you to do is look at the image of this picture and now look into his eyes, or just look at him, transmit the picture, and you, Julian, the picture that she's transmitting to you is appearing in that inner imaginary television screen. What do you see? What is coming up in your mind?
Some kind of diamond shape.
Okay, continue describing.
No. Columns. A big column, rounded, not square. Possibly light browny, grey brick.
Fantastic. Okay, I will turn it to you and look. This is what it was.
Ah.
Brick,
Yeah.
light brown, and the columns. Well done. Let's go next. Okay. All right. Lorna, go ahead. Project that image into his mind. What's the thing that you're looking at? What is it that you see?
I've got trees overhanging by a river.
Okay.
Possibly a bridge going on.
Look at me.
Mm.
You got it.
No,
you got the river. There's a river. There is a river.
And the bridge.
And the bridge.
It's now Lorna's turn to try an exercise in remote viewing.
I'm going to now take off. I'll drive somewhere out there. I will find a location. I will stand on the location. I will stare at the location. And I will try to transmit what I see there to your mind here. Have your phone ready and good luck.
Right, thanks.
I think this would be a good place. Just slow down here, turn into this parking lot right here. I think I can see a bridge down there. There's a boat crossing the Thames of the
place, because that could really mix me up. Right now, I'm stepping and walking on the bridge. I'm focusing my mind on this bridge. I'm etching it onto my mind. I see the black railing. I feel the concrete. I'm looking at the water. I'm looking at the supporters. The bridge, the bridge, the bridge. Let's call her now.
Hello?
Lorna, is that you?
It is, yeah. Hi,
Hi.
Ori.
Okay, I am on the target. I'm actually looking at it right now, and I would like you to write down at this moment what you see in that imaginary TV screen right now. Okay, I'm shutting the phone, and
Okay.
I'll be driving back to see you. Okay?
Okay,
One
all
more
right
time, one more time.
Yeah.
Here goes, here goes. Draw what you feel. Let your hand flow. Draw what you feel. Bye.
Bye. I really hope that this is remotely connected to what he's just sent me.
Okay, guys, I'm back.
Oh no.
Lorna.
Can I just say that I didn't realise that it was going to be that quick. And there was one image that stuck in my mind more than
Really?
the others.
Okay, I was on the location. I really did my best. What did you feel?
I'll show you, shall I?
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
not it, is it?
Well, let me tell you something. It's not it, but it is it. It is it because. Shall I tell you what it was?
Yeah.
Okay. I was on a bridge, and suddenly into my vision came a boat with rowers, and they kept coming into the picture. It was very difficult for me to get out of my mind.
So you weren't trying to send her the boat, you were trying to send her...
I was trying to send the bridge,
Right.
but I was on water because I was on the bridge. Yes, you got the water, you got the river, and you got the boat.
Fantastic.
I mean, it is rather amazing, you know, taking in view that we did it so quickly. Now, can you imagine if you would be trained for many months? You would become incredible remote viewers. Would you like to work for the CIA? That's the question.